and my house became like the biggest, bougiest trap house. Guns, the cameras, the dogs. And I got lonely one day, and I got in the wrong vehicle, and I ended up getting groomed by sex traffickers. And I was an Alberta-wide missing person as of September 27th, 2023.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
Brandi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
You've taken quite a journey to be here today. You're from Fort McMurray.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When I asked you before the show, how would you like to be identified? You said something very interesting, and I think I'll let you talk about that a little bit.
The excitement in my life now is not knowing exactly who I am and where I'm going and how I'm going to get there, right? Is kind of letting go of this idea that that I'm defined by my children, or defined by a master's, or defined by how much education I have or lack thereof, because I'm not.
Mm-hmm. And shout out to Ryan Oscar from Darkness to Life for connecting us, of course.
Yeah, Ryan's phenomenal. That was the first time I'd ever shared my story, was on a podcast, so that was a little nerve-wracking. But Ryan is awesome. He's very good at what he does.
Yeah. And of course, welcome, Donna.
Thank you.
Welcome to
Good
the
to be here.
podcast. Yeah.
Always good to be here.
Always good to have you.
And I just got to say, I really like that what you said about the excitement of your life right now is figuring who you are and where you're going and things. Because for so long, I've been hard on myself, and like something that's deep bothering me about the fact that I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. But the way that you framed that, I'm like, maybe that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about your journey, and I don't think I'll drop any spoilers. So why don't we turn it over to you, and let's get started. Where did all of this stuff with substance use start for you?
I think in telling my story that I've really come to realize that it doesn't start with substance abuse. Like, that was the least of my concerns and the least of my problems. It was why in which I was using substances to begin with, right? And that's really been the success of my recovery, is digging down to the root cause. This is all I knew right from go, was I was sexually abused at what started about 1.5 by a close family relative. And then it just carried on. This abuse happened again when I was probably about 5 or 6 years old, with my mom's abuser. I kind of became the walking, talking billboard of all the things that nobody wanted to talk about, right? Because I was the only girl in my family. I have 2 older brothers. So I really got the message from a very young age that I was bad, right? That I was wrong, that there was something wrong with me. I started acting out pretty extreme. I don't remember ever actually having these outbursts. As far as I know, they were just outbursts like of absolute rage. And I just remember being told between my mom, my aunts, my uncles, foster parents, police officers, and social workers, that I was having these outbursts and that there was something really, really wrong with me, that there was things. So I spent some time in assessment centers. I went to 3 different assessment centers. They flew in a psychologist to the Ministry of Children and Family Development to speak to me. My dad didn't want to keep me because of the accusations. And he later on told me that he didn't keep me because he didn't want me to run around saying that he had abused me. He didn't want that to come back on him. So he took me to a babysitter's house, who I was really near and dear to, and she didn't want to keep me either. Again, because of the behavior, whatever behavior I was exhibiting, right? Like, my memory as a child is that I was, loving and caring and kind. I remember emptying a whole lilac tree for my mom and giving her, every lilac on the tree, right? The whole house was covered in lilacs for her when she came home from work, and that's the child that I remember being. These foster parents were supposed to adopt me, and she was my childcare worker, and her wife was a probation officer, youth probation officer. And they told me that they wanted to adopt me, and I had to tell my mom that I had to be a permanent ward of the court to give me up. And so I did tell my mom that, and my mom did exactly that. She asked me that day, she says, "Are you sure?" And I said, "I'm sure." I was only in grade 6.
What an incredible responsibility to put on someone in grade 6.
I think I was so disassociated at this point because of all the trauma and all the abuse that I had suffered, that I kind of just wanted to belong so much. I just wanted a home. I just wanted love. I just wanted to know I was enough, and I wanted to know that I was worthwhile, that I really would have just done anything. And it was a really hard moment, I think, because I finally thought that I was going to have that life. I was going to have that family. And they started putting me in respite care on and off all the time, and they would do family things without me. In grade 7, I started in in the junior high school in Cranbrook. I made it about halfway through before I started fighting and I started drinking and I started doing drugs. Again, I think just to belong, like, I can take care of this for you. Watch me. Are you going to like me afterward? Like, I was selling myself to older men when I was like 11 and 12 years old. I had normalized it so much that I didn't even realize that I was trafficking myself because it felt like consensual, and it's absolutely was not. And I was abused by women just as much as I was abused by men, right? Just I'd be walking and they would, catcall me and they would stop, pull over, pick me up. And then they would end up paying me for sex, and they're in their 40s and I'm, 11, 12 years old. But the money and drugs weren't ever, I could have cared less if I had the money or drugs. The money and drugs was so that I could take it back to my friends and be like, hey, cool, can I hang out now? Look what I have. A lot of when I was younger, I never had any friends. Nobody wanted to allow, the bad kid to hang out with their kids. I remember even the parents would phone my mom or even phone me and get me on the phone. I was like, and I'm talking, I was like in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, like I was just a baby, and tell me that their kids couldn't hang out with me, that I couldn't be friends with them, right? And so I never really knew what was wrong with me. The only thing that I cared about was trying to get some love and attention and affection from anybody that would give it to me. I ended up with gangs in Calgary after I left Cranbrook at about 16, and again getting passed around by some serious gangsters. And the boyfriend at the time, again, I was 16, he was 24 years old.
By this time, did you recognize it was sex work?
No. Not at all. I remembered when I was 11 years old, I went into a hotel room with 20-some-year-old men, and it was literally just a free-for-all with me. And I never realized, it never dawned on me that this was sexual abuse. And I think that that's accurate for a lot of people. They think because they're consenting that they can consent. Yeah, no, I was never really involved in gangs other than I was the pretty girl that hung out with the gangsters. Right.
Did you feel powerful?
I think there's always a level of control there. I think even when I was selling myself, there's a level of control there. I think there's a level of control in being submissive in certain situations, right? Especially being a woman where everything feels like it's out of control. But I learned at a very young age to use my body as a way to get what I needed and what I wanted. I married a man in the military. I was working in a pub in Wainwright, Alberta, and he came into the pub, and something inside me, he asked me to go to a wedding. He says, I'm going to a wedding in Regina. Do you want to come? And so I went to the wedding with him, and I ended up pregnant, and I moved back to Regina with him. He was very physically abusive, and I always thought it was something wrong with me, right? I thought that I needed to just keep my mouth shut. I just needed to stop. The last time when I finally left, he came home from work one day and he told me that it smelled like dog in the house. And he thought that I'd had the farm dogs in the house. And so he ended up, he kicked the ever living shit right out of me, and our daughter intervened. And Kylie was, again, she was only about 4 years old. And she intervened and she got backhanded and she flew into the couch. I wasn't allowed to have friends, right? I wasn't allowed to have bank cards. I wasn't allowed to have money. I wasn't allowed to have a vehicle. And so I phoned one of my only friends, and she's like, you need to get out of there. And that confirmation and that validation that it wasn't me, that it wasn't okay, was what got me out of there. I took my kids and we went back to Cranbrook, and I stayed there for the next 10 years. From the outside looking in, I was a great mom. I, worked really hard. I ran a landscape company. There was a time in which, for probably about 6 months, that I really went, out on left field and used a lot and left the kids alone for, long periods of time with babysitters. It's been a pattern after I end up in these relationships and they end, badly. That I kind of go off the rails for a very short period of time, right? And start using to just absolutely, I can't handle the stress of what's happening. And then I met my second husband, and he's an incredibly wonderful man. I could sit and probably talk about him just for an hour, and I'm forever grateful. I always say that he's the one good thing that I ever did for, all my children. And I got pregnant with my third child. He worked away a lot. I started cheating on him. I went on Ashley Madison and I met my third husband. And if you're meeting your husband on Ashley Madison, you're going to have a bad time. He left his wife of 16 years and I had left mine of 4, and I married him after 3 months of knowing him. And so we had this beautiful house. I had a beautiful career. At this point, I was working for Yellow Pages. I was a marketing consultant for Yellow Pages. Chris had a really great, prestigious career. We used to fly all over the place. I had bought him a Maserati for his birthday. I'd bought my Mercedes the same day. it was in and out, hot and cold, push and pull, push and pull. He would leave and take off for, weeks on end and completely ghost me. And he finally left for the last time, went back to the United States, and I had written a suicide note to my kids. I literally was using to oblivion at this point, and I wanted to die. I had a beautiful house, I had beautiful cars. I was driving around in a Maserati smoking, lending my Mercedes out to the plugs and the line workers while I was driving around sitting in the passenger seat using. I had so much money and so much time, right? And that was just it. That's all I did. I always say that it was the drugs that kept me alive.
Do you find gratitude for that?
I don't know if I found gratitude, but I think my biggest flex is always going to be that God never took his hands off me. Right. So, so I was using to complete oblivion, and that was the idea, was to die. I'd written a suicide note, and I phoned Clay, and I said, Clay, come get the kids. I'm not coming home. He came. He was working in Fort McMurray at this point, and he came back. He flew back, and he took the kids, and he had them for about a month and a half. Like, I mean, the house had turned into nothing shy of a really bougie trap house. So I spent some time cleaning the house up, trying to get the bills back in order. And so the kids came back for about a month, and I fell off the wagon again. My dad died. He passed away from an overdose while I was getting the kids back, and it was all on me. I was the only child, biological child of my dad, so I was the only one that was available to do any of these arrangements. I was 2 weeks sober when he passed away. There was a gentleman that he was living with that phoned me, and he FaceTimes me, and my dad's naked in a pool of blood on the floor. And he had, I find out later on that Dean had taken pictures of my dad. There's pictures circulating now of my dad and his body and in this pool of blood. And the coroner's report came back, and it was a heart attack, right? He was same DOC as me. I don't think I actually even cried about it until I was on my way to Cranbrook to go and deal with the funeral arrangements and deal with my dad's cremation. And I'd absolutely lost it, and I started shaking uncontrollably and crying and screaming. And in my head, I'm going like, was this an accident? Did this, like, what was this? What really happened? With Dean chasing the assets, with Dean having pictures, with him, sending them to other people and asking these people of whether or not this looks like an accident. And at this point, I'm just really furious, really torn up, and ended up going out to like his kind of ranch, cottage, or whatever you want to call it. And so that's where I ended up actually relapsing. We kind of hid there for about 2 days, and I had my cousin finally come out and get me when I finished the funeral arrangements, and packed my stuff up and went back to Maple Ridge. I fell off the edge, and I started using again, and I lost my kids. At this point, Clayton had come get the kids because they were left alone for like days and days and days and days on end. And my daughter, who's the oldest, she was probably 14 at the time. And my son probably 11 or 12 at the time. And so they're quite young still, and all responsible for looking after their little sister and each other. And they're terrified. Like, mom has never taken off. She's always been a weekend warrior, and to take off like this, it's traumatizing to them. At this point, I could have been up for, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 days at a time, completely in psychosis at this point. And I have no recollection of how many days I was out. So I couldn't stand the feelings that I would get when I was sober. And that's where I say I think the drugs saved my life. I think that they were the only things that kept me sane enough and feeling good enough that I didn't actually just end up offing myself. I remember laying in this king-size bed in this beautiful room with this gorgeous view, and a bedroom that's, bigger than probably someone's whole house. And thinking, and I was never been more miserable in my entire life. And I had some pills in my top drawer, and it was just literally a matter of, okay, when I get up, I'll grab them. And once I lost my kids, I remember it feeling like they died. I never, ever, ever thought that my life would come back. I couldn't even go in their rooms. Yeah. And my house became like the biggest, bougiest trap house. Guns, the cameras, the dogs, and the bougie house and the money. So, I mean, everybody that was anybody wanted to be there and be with me. So I got really behind. I started running out of money. I mean, that happens. I started running out of money and having to come up with creative ways to fund myself and basically everybody that was around. And the minute I couldn't fund it, everybody started not wanting to be there anymore. I would started selling everything in the house. I mean, it was a 7-bedroom house with 3 living rooms. It was always to pay for the use and the party. And so I knew that there was coming a point in time where they were going to come and get the house. And so I started getting really paranoid, and I was with someone, and he's like, let's go to Alberta and we're going to go do some fraud. And I was like, this sounds great. Let's do that. Let's jump in the truck and go. So May long weekend, we took off to Alberta, and I packed the truck up, and something in me knew that I would never go back. And I didn't. I lost my house, my dad, my cars, my kids, my career, my life within about 6 months. And I found myself completely and utterly homeless with absolutely nothing but the bags that I had packed into my truck, which I later ended up losing. On the streets. I went over to Alberta Supports building and went kind of comatose on their doorstep, and was picked up by the police and taken to Ponoka, which is a psychiatric hospital, and had like a partial diagnosis done there, and it came back with either borderline personality disorder or bipolar. And then they let me out, and they had someone that was going to drive me back to Hinton, and I ended up convincing this kind of cabbie to drive me to Calgary, and I'm going to go meet my friend in Calgary, and she was out there with doing some gang stuff, and I was like, well, take me to this one, take me to this girl. And I kind of got into a little bit of trouble with her. I decided, I had this epiphany, I'm like, I'm going to go to Fort McMurray and go be with my kids. I'm going to go get sober. And so I phoned them, and they barely would even talk to me. And it's, it's probably midnight, and I literally phoned them and told them to, wake everybody up in the house. Mom's coming home. It's a big deal, right? And so I'm like, I'm coming back, and I ended up hitchhiking from Medicine Hat all the way to Fort McMurray the next day. And I got lonely one day, and I decided I was going to go. I could have one drink. And I had that drink at Earl's, and I came out, and I got in the wrong vehicle. And I ended up getting groomed by sex traffickers. And I was an Alberta-wide missing person as of September 27th, 2023. They had taken my apartment keys. They had taken all my ID. They had taken my bank cards. They had tied me to a chair and put my phone in a microwave. And so I had like absolutely nothing. They would tell me things like they loved me and they cared about me and they wanted to be with me, and they would act as if they were going to protect me, and they would give me, drugs and stuff to take downtown, and they would give me this false illusion that I was safe and I was protected and I was with them, and then it was kind of like well, you owe me, right? I need you to do X, Y, and Z. It was more manipulative still at this point, right? It wasn't as blunt as that. And I still, at some points leading up to this, I still had my bank cards and I still had money coming in. And, I would give them, go buy, certain things for them or buy the drugs for them and then give them and hand them over to them, right? And then it was gaslighting with like losing I remember when I lost my apartment keys, I was like, they were on the end of the bed. And they're like, no, they're not on the end of the bed. I'm like, they were just on the end of the bed. I just seen them. And they're like, no, you're crazy. You're losing it. Like, they weren't on the end of the bed. Let's look for them. All my clothes would start going missing, and they had a room full of clothes in another room. And they'd be like, oh, just go put this stuff on. Go put other things on. I'd be like, well, where did my clothes go? We'd go out and we'd come back, and more and more and more of my stuff would be missing, right? I remember one of them, he locked all my stuff in a car and pretended like he locked his keys in the car, and then gets into a fight with me and tells me to go wait here. I'm going to get someone to help me with the car and get the car unlocked, and ended up leaving me downtown and leaving me completely unsupervised, right? Downtown is where I ended up getting picked up. That's how I got picked up by someone else that was friends with him, and getting taken to Lloydminster. And they were paying for the hotel, and they stopped paying for the hotel room, and I had nowhere to go and no means to do anything. And my mom actually ended up paying for 2 nights, and actually my ex-husband at this point ended up actually phoning in his credit card and paying for a night for me. I was able to get a hold of them, and so I ended up getting picked up by a street team and taken to the women's safe shelter there. They took me to and got me some medical care, got me some medication, and took me to the women's safe shelter in Lloydminster, where I stayed for, I think it was around 6 weeks. When I got to the shelter, I thought I was just going to get sober, I was going to get a job, and I was going to go back to my kids. One of the the staff, it came out and she said, well, what about a treatment center? Like, what are you going to do? And I remember I lost it on her. Like, what do you mean? What am I going to do? Like, I'm going to go look after my kids. Like, why are you talking to me like this? Like, she hit on every single kind of insecurity that I possibly had, right? I was trying to blame her, and I was like, how am I going to get out of this? I remember trying to figure out some way to manipulate my way out of this. And I remember stopping and thinking and really being like, okay, hold on. Why is it that you, like, what came up and what happened? Why is it that you don't want to go to treatment? Why is it that you think that you don't need treatment? Like, what is going on here? What is this hitting on? And so I was able to go back up, and I actually had the conversation with the staff, and I said, like, you know, I don't know what came up in me, but there was this, you know, huge insecurity and fear of going to treatment, thinking that I don't need it, that I'm better than that. Will you please help me get into treatment? It was October 11th, 2023, when I finally got sober, when I went into the women's safe shelter.
Okay, we're going to take a break and read off today's sponsors, and then we'll talk some recovery. All right, EHN Canada is Canada's leading provider of mental health and addiction services, providing evidence-based, medically assisted care with 1-year wraparound services for those suffering from substance use disorder. In Saskatchewan, their care is 100% supported by Saskatchewan Health. To learn more, find their link in the show notes below. Wellness News, Choice for Healthy Living, is a local resource that works to connect people to health and wellness-related products, services, and expert advice from industry professionals, locally allowing us to connect and engage. Check out wellnessnews.ca or skwellnesshub.ca today to learn more. If you'd like to see our content uncensored, we are now offering channel memberships. There is a lot of things we can't show you without getting restricted, so if you want the full conversation, or to check out our merch, or if you want to show us some love and buy us a coffee, all of those links are in the show notes below. So tell us about your first year in recovery.
I walked into Thorpe thinking that once I was done the program, I would be good. I'd be healed. And I lasted the 40 days, and I had what was considered a medical emergency. And it was during a conflict resolution. And it's funny, I prayed for conflict resolution, you know, skills, and God's never given me a fish. He always gives me a fishing rod. And so he gave me conflict. And I ended up in a conflict with my roommate at the time, and I ended up in a room, and they had kind of blocked, the two counselors had blocked the room. And I kept telling them, like, I could literally feel it coming up, and I knew what was going to happen. And it gets to a certain point where I can't control it anymore. It gets to a point where it has to exert somehow, and I don't want to hurt people, and I don't want to hurt property, and I don't want to scream, I don't want to yell, I don't want to nothing. But it gets to a point where I have to exert the energy somehow. And it ended up that I threw a cup, and I started freaking out, and I ended up hitting myself and abusing myself in these moments of rage. The CEO of Thorpe ended up phoning the CEO of Aventa, which is trauma informed, which was a better fit for me, and getting me door to door at 40 days. So I was, 2 days shy of graduating Thorpe. I think it was about 2 days shy of graduating Thorpe. And I went, my counselor, my EC at the time, put me on a bus. I spent 7 weeks at Aventa at phase 2. I was like, there's not really that much more there. There's nothing, for me to dig into. And it was really complicated in phase 2. It ended up being really complicated. I didn't realize that I had always used you statements, right? Instead of being like, I feel, I'd be like, you.
Oh, okay.
And and how hard that was to be around. I just remember being really resentful. I remember being really resentful towards my counselor because I wanted her acceptance so badly. And I remember her, it felt like she wouldn't really accept me for like who I was and what was going on. And it was really, really hard and complicated for me. And so it really forced me to start really looking at self and really looking at myself and what it was that was happening and how it was that it was happening. Phase 2 is a lot about learning, how to hold space for other people and what that looked like. I had no idea how to hold space. I was using you statements with people instead of I statements and I feel, and how that's so empowering to use those statements, right? To be like, I feel. It's just, you can self-validate with that, and you're able to have some ownership, right, over what it is. Like, and there's so much autonomy involved, and like, I can feel and think whatever I want to feel and think, right? You don't have to agree with it. And I remember the moment that I realized that using I statements was empowering. Right? It was so empowering because I can feel and think and be whatever I want to feel and think and be, and you don't have to agree with me. Somewhere along the line, I decided that one of the most selfish things that I could possibly do was go back to my kids before I was ready. But I just kept going, and I just kind of took, each next step as needed, right? I thought I was going to be done at Thorpe, right, after 90 days. And then I went to Aventa, and I thought I was going to be done after 7 weeks. And then I'd heard about phase 3, and I was like, no, I'm going to go do phase 3 too. I'm going to really wring this dry. I'm going to really, really push until there's nothing else left. And I don't think I realized like how much actually like just how dysfunctional I actually was. I ended up going to phase 3. I went door to door from Aventa phase 2 into phase 3. And then I went from phase 3, I went over to Oxford House, sober living, and I went up to the dual diagnosis clinic at Foothills for another 6 weeks outpatient.
Wow.
And then I did on and dime transformations as well while I was in sober living. And I didn't go make plans to go back to my kids until I was a year sober. When I was in phase 3, I didn't even know what a boundary was. I had no idea that boundaries were directly linked to our values. I never knew how important my values were until I realized my values are actually my sense of self, and that boundaries are actually something that we make with ourselves. They're boundaries that we make with ourselves around our values to make sure that other people aren't impeding on our values, our sense of self, right? And so that was bizarre to me, like to learn all these things. I never had these skills. It was literally as if I was a little kid and they were reparenting me. When it comes to intimate sexual relationships, my age is still like probably like a 15 or 16-year-old kid in the way that I handle and manage those relationships. But the rest of my recovery is very much starting to come into adult. It's literally as if I had to regrow up again.
Tell us a little bit about going into the world.
Being like, I had to really shift my perspective and shift into, okay, well, I can't or I won't, right? Like, what does this actually look like? Because there's a huge avoidance there. There's a lot of responsibility now all of a sudden and a lot of pressure that was bringing up different aspects of I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, and I'm worthless again. And so it really felt like once I got back to Fort McMurray, it really started to feel like I took 10 steps backwards, right? Because all of a sudden my safety nets are gone now. I don't have people around me all the time that know how to therapy talk. And I have other people that have different styles of healing as well, right? Like for McMurray, you see a lot of people that predominantly have AA and NA and they don't have a lot of therapy. And so all of a sudden I didn't fit or belong again. The way in which I handle it has been so beautiful because I don't care. It's not my job to change people's minds. It's not my job to be something that I'm not so that I can belong to something that doesn't belong to me. And I think that being my authentic self and having that ability now to be my authentic self, I'm really truly able to let go of what's not mine and embrace everything that is. I want the people that are meant for me and the people that I'm meant for to be a part of my life. And the only way I'm going to get there is by being my authentic self. My recovery coach said something to me, and I use this as a tool all the time. Is she said, just be your authentic self and always surrender the rest. Always. And that means that a lot of things aren't going to work out in your favor, right? But you have to just let go of those things. Like I have to be like, okay, that wasn't meant for me. Or I have to get more skills and abilities to be able to do this.
I'm interested to hear about reintegrating into the relationships with your kids, with your, with Clayton?
Clayton. Yeah, coming back into the relationship with my kids. I had originally started the relationship with my children slowly and surely before I even came back to Fort McMurray. At the very first, I really kind of didn't focus on the relationship with my kids. I focused on my recovery when I was in Thorpe and in phase 2. And it felt like a lot of work. Like I felt like a lot of work to try and rebuild these relationships. And to the point that like I almost didn't want to. As bizarre as that sounds, but it felt like it was too big and too much. And so I just didn't because I wasn't ready. As much as I want to tell them and tell people and be like, yeah, I got sober for my kids and that's great. I got sober so that my kids have the opportunity to have a sober mom and so that I can not continue the generational trauma that we had all suffered.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sober and I'm who I need to be so I can teach my children autonomy. I'm sober and who I am so I can teach my children how to be messy and imperfect and know that they're absolutely lovable, worthwhile, and enough. But first I had to do those things for myself. At first it was really not even a concern in my mind. And you hear a lot of people say that it's, you know, I got to get back to my kids. I got to get back to my kids. I got to get back to my kids. And I'm like, the most selfish thing that I ever could have done is run back to my kids. I have a lot of healing to do. I have a long story of a lot of trauma and a lot of abuse. And so therefore I had a lot of responsibility to heal these things inside myself. So I'm not dragging it back and leaking it all over my children and then ending up back in addiction. But I slowly but surely started to gain some more traction where I had the space to be able to start integrating my kids back into my life, and I could start integrating myself back into theirs slowly. And it started with one phone call a week, and it felt really, like I said, it felt really big. It felt like the end of the world that I had to schedule my children in to have this conversation with them. I built the resiliency and the capacity to be able to handle being a mom again, to be able to handle phoning my kids on a regular basis where I didn't feel like I was picking up a boulder that was 5,000 pounds when it was my cell phone. You couldn't even sit beside me and chew without me losing my mind. Everything felt like a nightmare. My whole life hurt. Everything hurt. And once I got into sober living, I really started to see it snowball into a relationship again. And they're very much back in my life now. We have a group chat going that we just started on my way out here because I was trying to text all three of them and they're like, where are you? What are you doing? And I'm like, oh my gosh. The kids are they can teach you so much about life because I think they just come by it naturally. And they really have the skills and abilities that I had to learn. My children have and possess. I watch them use those skills and abilities all the time. I remember Kylie, she invited me to play. She was, Mom, we come and play volleyball for this event with all the other parents, which was a little bit nerve-wracking. I had to really get my head right there as well because, you know, all these moms and dads know that I haven't been around for the last year, and what am I going to look like going in there? And it's a really cool moment where, again, I realized, like, I don't care. And it sounds so cliche, but I really genuinely don't. And I don't want, you know, people to be passive aggressive or, you know, rude or indifferent to me because of this, but I'm okay at the end of the day, even if they are. Like, I'm here for Kylie, and I hope you have fun with me because I'm pretty fun. I'm pretty cool, and I hope I have fun with you, and that's what I'm here for.
So let's talk about relationships, about dating, about what would that look like?
Shoot. Okay.
Sorry, I'm not even sorry.
Let's go.
I'm not. I was gonna say sorry, but then I'm like, no, I'm not sorry.
No.
This is such a valuable. You have such valuable insights. I'm not sorry. I'm humbled that we get to bring awareness to this message.
Relationships have been really complicated for me. I have borderline personality disorder, so it's really, really complicated for me to build relationships because it comes with extreme abandonment issues. I do have intimate relationships, and I am very capable of building relationships with friends, family. That's not an issue anymore, but intimate sexual relationships wasn't something that I got into for the first year. So it's part of my recovery that, again, it has to catch up. And it was also the most dangerous part of my recovery. I mean, let's not forget that every time that I fell really, really hard into oblivion of use, where I literally wanted to die, was after a bad breakup. But some things we can't learn on our own. I couldn't learn what it was like and who I was and what was still coming up in intimate sexual relationships until I started experiencing them. And I had no idea that I was still so unhealed. I think I was literally just talking to my therapist about this the other day, and we had kind of an aha moment where the first intimate relationship that I was in right after this kind of year, I started feeling this like want and desire started to come up, and I was like, okay, like I'm ready. And once it starts coming up, then you can feel it. Like I can feel that I'm kind of ready to explore this and dip my toes in, right? And it wasn't until then that I was really ready to do it. And I started getting curious about it. And so I met this person, and he's probably going to listen to this podcast. How embarrassing.
Hey, bud.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Tell us all the bad things.
All the horrible things. Yeah. But I was really black and white with this relationship. Like I went all in like almost immediately. I was like, I'm in. And I started staying with him like right through, like, and I started all of a sudden, you see me start like missing appointments. And I started like, not hanging out with my friends as much. And I started like hanging out with his friends and going to his meetings and doing all this. And I'm like, wow, this feels a lot like addiction. Like my life has become really unmanageable, and I'm starting to like fall back on all these things, and I'm not really, talking about the things I want to talk about, and I'm not really myself, and I'm irritable and I'm blameful and I'm critical of this person. And I'm like, wow, this really mimics addiction. I later realized that I was sitting in codependency, and I was sitting in like a process addiction as well, right? And also, so my process addiction, codependency, behavioral addiction, but then I'm also sitting in attachment issues, right? That kind of I'm sitting in major attachment issues, and I'm in a situation where my nervous system is like, again, attaching your worth and your want and like my value to this other person. Like, you need to be and act and do everything a certain way so that I feel okay about me, right? And if you don't act and do and be a certain way, and tell me that you love me this way, this way, this way, check in on me here, phone me here, do this there, and you don't build this puzzle the way that I need you to build this puzzle so that I can be whole, that's going to be an issue. And it was. When that relationship ended, it was so incredible because I didn't fall off the deep end. I didn't explode. And this is a conversation I had with my recovery coach, and I'm so incredibly proud of myself. And it's so self-validating. Just remember, one of my really good close friends and my sponsor, she's like, I'm on my way with coffee. And I'm like, okay. And so she did, and I went and hung out with her, and I drank coffee, and I just sat in it, and I'm like, this sucks. Like, this is so uncomfortable. And my stomach was going, and I didn't know if I was hungry or wanted to throw up. I'm like, this is gross. Like, I hate this feeling. And I would just name it, and I'm like, this just sucks. And my friend would just be like, are you okay? And I'm like, absolutely not. I am not well. It wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't everything that I thought it was. Once I was able to take that attachment, that unhealthy attachment out of it, I was able to, the feelings were not as amplified anymore. It's a really cool moment when you start responding in a healthy manner. If somebody would have told me that it would have taken a year of really, really hard work, and told me that I could have these skills and abilities where I could actually sit with someone and enjoy a cup of coffee, I would have called them an effing liar. My relationships have taught me a lot, and I'm still learning. And they're still messy as all heck.
So I'm very curious about like this current sort of stage of things. So the overdose awareness nonprofit, as well as the pursuing the MBA.
The MBA is a program that I'm going to be able to do, and it's going to give me the skills and abilities to build the trauma treatment centers that I want to build. Like I said before, everything felt really big. My whole life hurt. Everything poked a trauma or a trigger on me. It didn't matter what you were doing or how you did it. Everything hurt, and I was angry and pissed off about everything. And so how do we recover more people? What's the root cause? Because I'm a root cause thinker. What is the root cause underlying a lot of mental health and addictions and perpetuated sexual abuse? And the answer that I came up with, and it's maybe not the answer, the end all, but the answer that I came up with is sexual abuse. So the idea behind the MBA, and I'm going to do the 36-month program. So it's because I'll work at the same time, hopefully as a recovery coach. And I'll be building the trauma treatment centers at the same time. So that's my life's work. And whether or not I actually see it transpire, I don't know, and I don't care, right? In the relay race of life, we never know if we're the ones starting the race or the ones finishing it. I do not need a destination anymore to feel like I'm enough. Overdose Awareness is a small, newer non-for-profit that my really good friend founded. She founded the Purple Chair Project, and I was really inspired by her just drive and tenacity and passion behind this overdose awareness and bringing the awareness. So I jumped on board originally because my passion, I really love business development, and I love navigating strategic plans, and I love the social networking. There's just the opportunities to be able to end the stigma. That's really with the advocacy and the stigma. Ending the stigma is really where my heart is. We have an opportunity to potentially go into another organization and interview addicts still in addiction. We think that that's going to probably cause enough controversy to be able to get people to really push those awareness buttons. I don't think that I would have been ready for either of these adventures had I still had the same mindset, like the capability to be able to not pick up what other people put down, to have the capacity to be able to hold the weight of people being angry at me on my shoulders and still be able to, and to be able to fall in front of them and get back up. And it's true, you know, entrepreneurial styles, like, you know, can you fall and get back up? Can you fall on your face and get back up and still do what you're supposed to, what you want to do? Can you have people and naysayers tell you that you absolutely can't do this and you can't accomplish it and you're crazy, and still go after it with the same tenacity and bravery and courage, right? But still have the openness and willingness to not be so ignorant and not, you know, have the humility necessary to actually hear what they're saying.
So where can people find you?
We have a Facebook page, Overdose Awareness Alberta, and we have an Instagram page as well, Overdose Awareness Alberta, and our website is overdoseawareness.ca, where you can find us, and you can find links to all our social medias in there as well. Please watch for us on TikTok. We're going to be posting those videos on TikTok and on Reels fairly soon, and that's going to be, you know, kind of an exciting point for us. Yeah,
Right on.
We'll make sure to post those links in the show notes below, so people can find you. Brandi, it has been a privilege today walking through your journey with you. Thank you so much for bringing such valuable insights to our community. Certainly, your testimony will save lives. Long may your journey continue. You know, and thank you very much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me and providing platforms for people to be able to share their experience, strength, and hope.
Take care, my friend.
Thank you. Take care.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.